6 p.m. on Wednesday here in Korea. Thank you for joining us for our newscast. I'm Daniel Che. Let's start with the headlines. The 10th round of Korea-Japan talks on Tokyo's wartime sex crime begins with a 2-hour talk, yet there's still a long way to go for both sides to narrow their differences and resolve this issue. Korea's youth unemployment rate is at its lowest in more than 2 years thanks to a great number of new jobs created, but is it just quality over quantity? November 11th, the day World War I ended, marks Remembrance Day and Veterans Day for nations around the world. In Korea's port city of Busan, Korean war veterans were invited for a special tribute to the heroes. Korea and Japan held their 10th round of talks in Seoul today, seeking to resolve their differences over Tokyo's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. This comes after a recent agreement by both leaders to resolve the issue quickly. We now cross to Song Jae-sun, who is standing by at the Foreign Ministry. Jae-sun, can you fill us in on the talks?
Good evening, Daniel. South Korea and Japan held their 10th round of working level talks for 2 hours this morning here at Seoul's Foreign Ministry, followed by a luncheon during which they said both sides continue their efforts to narrow differences toward reaching an agreement. These are the first talks since the summit earlier this month between President Park Geun-hye and Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, when the two leaders agreed to expedite negotiations for a faster resolution. Tokyo claims its legal obligation was settled in a 1965 agreement that normalized relations between the two countries, but says the two should work together so this issue doesn't come up again. Some rebuts this by arguing that so-called comfort women issue was not included in that treaty. Seoul's foreign ministry stressed the agreement only mentioned economic cooperation and property claims, and what Japan did during the wartime was an illegal act against humanity, especially towards women's rights. Over 200,000 women, most of whom were Korean, were forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military during and before World War II. Now, only 47 are alive today. The victims demand Tokyo issues a formal apology and offers them compensation, whereas Tokyo tries to evade legal issues by trying to deal with the issue on humanitarian grounds. On when the next talks will be held, the military only says at an early date we're working through diplomatic channels. Seoul has also expressed deep regret regarding reports coming from Japan's media outlets over details of the November 2nd summit talks, which they called a discourtesy in diplomacy, which could hamper Tokyo's reputation in the international community. I'm Song Jae-sun reporting live at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you for the report, Jae-sun. Moving on, South Korea's rival parties held yet another round of negotiations over how to redraw the nation's electoral map ahead of general elections set for next April. But according to our Park Ji-won, the talks ended without any result.
4 representatives, each from the ruling Saenuri Party and the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy, including both party leaders, attempt to reach agreement over the redrawing of constituencies. But Wednesday's talks that continued for 3 hours failed to find a solution.
Wednesday's talks are over. Since we haven't reached an agreement, we will meet again at noon Thursday. Aside from that, we cannot talk about it anymore.
This issue has to be resolved somehow, so we will put our best efforts to come to an agreement.
The legal deadline for submitting the revised constituency plan to Parliament is this Friday, 5 months ahead of the elections in April next year. The ruling Saenuri Party wants to maintain the 300-seat parliament by increasing the number of local constituencies while reducing the current 54 proportional representation seats. The party believes that by reducing the number of proportional representatives, it can make room for more rural constituencies without increasing the number of seats within the National Assembly. But the NPAD opposes the plan, saying it will fixate regionalism in Korean politics. The Liberal Party wants to maintain the number of seats given to proportional representation members, and they want to introduce region-based proportional representation members, who are chosen based on the total number of votes each party gets in each region. The Constitutional Court ruled late last year that the constituencies be redrawn to realize a more equal and fair representation of the population in each district. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
On the back of growing domestic demand, there are signs of improvement within Korea's job market, but whether the number of quality jobs are on the rise is still questionable. Hwang Ji-hye looks into the matter.
The number of new jobs added in Korea has hit the highest in 5 months. Statistics Korea data show that the total number of employed stood at over 26 million in October, up 348,000 from a year earlier. While the overall jobless rate dropped to 3.1%, that for the younger generation, which has long been a source of concern to economic policymakers, was also down to 7.4%. marking the lowest level in almost 2.5 years.
Jobless rate among those aged 15 to 29 dropped because of the number of employed in the age group soared. Among the 101,000 that got newly employed from a year earlier, 95,000 were in their 20s.
The overall improvement in the jobs data comes on the back of the Korean economy gaining momentum recently, thanks to government measures to boost domestic demand. The economy grew 1.2% in the July to September period from the previous quarter, beating market forecasts and posting the strongest quarterly growth since 2010. But experts say more employment does not necessarily mean the quality of jobs are also on the rise. In fact, job growth in the manual labor sector, where people earn money by cleaning or delivering, which are mostly part-time jobs, stood at the highest compared to other sectors.
We have to look at the overall situation when we analyze the current job market. It's because a rising number of employed is not leading to a rise in household income these days.
Experts add that such positive momentum in the job market is unlikely to become a longer-term trend when Korea's exports continue to drop due to slowing global demand, especially from China. Hwang-ji-hye, Arirang News.
Less than 2 months till 2015 is up, it's becoming clear that Korea will most likely not reach its annual trade target of $1 trillion. Kwon So-hwa shows us some of the government's measures to get the country's once main growth engine exports back on track.
Something has to be done about Korea's sluggish exports. That's been constantly reiterated by the government and economists throughout the year. Now, given the serious situation, Korea's Trade Ministry and 10 other government bodies put their heads together to discuss ways to get slowing exports back on track. In a joint meeting Wednesday, officials agreed to give administrative support to sectors with the greatest export potential. These include OLED products, new drugs, and cosmetics, all of which posted visible increases in shipments in the first 9 months of the year compared to the previous year and have not been influenced by the overall decline in exports. In particular, there are high expectations for the OLED industry as its market share accounts for almost half of that of the entire world, performing much better than China at number 2 and the Netherlands at number 3. The officials also agreed to create a 5-year plan to produce high-quality global consumer goods, including Korea's traditional ginseng chicken soup, samgyetang, and promote stronger sales to China. The export of samgyetang had been recently agreed to by President Park Geun-hye and Chinese Premier Li Keqiang. During Wednesday's briefing, Trade Minister Yoon Sang-jik emphasized the importance of various free trade agreements expected to soon come into effect.
If the Korea-China FTA ratification gets delayed further, it's been estimated that we'll have a loss of some $4 billion a day. In other words, a quick ratification will give us that much of profits.
Ratification of 3 bilateral FTAs with China, Vietnam, and New Zealand is pending and will hopefully be concluded ideally this year. Kwon So-hwa, Arirang News.
It's Singles' Day in China. In other words, the biggest online shopping day in the world. Thousands of Chinese consumers are clicking away online before the day is up, prompting Korean exporters to customize marketing strategies for the Chinese local market. Shin Se-min has this story.
It was an impressive start. E-commerce giant Alibaba Group logged over $3.9 billion in the first hour of China's Singles' Day. And the mega retailer's total gross merchandise volume keeps on climbing as the 24-hour deadline approaches. November 11th, 11/11 started out as an obscure event in the 1990s, where the country's bachelors and the bachelorettes celebrated being single. But in 2009, Alibaba turned it into an e-commerce phenomenon, with sales reaching nearly $9 billion last year, all through online shopping. It's much like the US Cyber Monday or Black Friday, except the size of single-day sales is 4 times that of Cyber Monday. On this day last year, Alibaba raked in total sales worth over 10 trillion won, or $8.6 billion, which is 100 times more than what all Korean online retailers combined have made in China in the past 5 years.
China's online retail market only takes up 10% of the entire domestic market, a minimal portion for now. But the speed of growth is so fast, it's hard to predict.
Ranging from electronic goods to clothing, the sales event also brings in over 5,000 overseas brands from 25 countries, including Korea, US, and Japan. It's one of the better ways to publicize Korean brands to some 20% of the world's entire population online during a 24-hour window.
In order to turn this mega sales event into a long-term opportunity, local exporters need to better come up with marketing tactics targeting specific age groups, mostly those in their 20s and 30s, and particular regions.
With China rebalancing its economy to one based on consumer spending following its slowing economic growth, it's become much clearer that Korean exporters mulling over options to restructure their export strategies should put heavier emphasis on shipping consumer goods to China. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Korea's financial watchdog has selected 175 small and mid-sized companies to undergo restructuring. This is 50 more than last year. The FSS attributes the sharp rise in debt-ridden companies, slow domestic and international demand amid a stalled economy, as well as stricter criteria for credit risk assessment. The watchdog categorized 105 firms as falling within the lowest D rating, which means they're subject to shutdown, while the remaining 70 given a C rating will be put on a mandatory debt workout program. Korea's ballooning household debt shows no signs of easing. The Bank of Korea says outstanding household loans extended by local banks come to about $540 billion as of the end of October, up nearly $8 billion from the previous month. This marks the largest monthly gain since the central bank began compiling relevant data in 2008. The BOK attributes the sharp increase to a rise in demand for mortgage loans on the back of an increase in new apartment sales. The ruling Saenuri Party and the government agreed Wednesday to further inject nearly $180 million for drought alleviation. It'll help fund reservoir dredging and building irrigation pipelines to send water from the country's 4 main rivers to drought-stricken areas. The 16 newly built dams along the Hangang, Kumgang, Nakdonggang, and Yeongsangang rivers have so far remained obsolete as they are too far from drought-affected areas. Korea remains gripped in its worst drought in more than a century, and the National Weather Agency expects it to continue until early next year. Voting results for Myanmar's national election were unveiled for the 3rd straight day. A landslide victory for Aung San Suu Kyi's party seems inevitable. Kim Geun-hye has the latest on the historic developments in Myanmar.
Myanmar's current opposition leader Aung San Suu Kyi has won her own seat in the country's parliament with nearly 55,000 votes, according to the country's election commission. As the election results continue to show a landslide win, she sent letters to the military, President Thein Sein, and Speaker of Parliament requesting meetings next week, in which President Sein agreed to meet her for power transfer. Suu Kyi is expected to return to the Komu constituency in Yangon, though she's barred from becoming president due to a constitutional mandate drafted by the country's military rulers, barring anyone with foreign family members assuming the top office. But she said this won't stop her from making all the decisions as leader of the winning party.
And if this constitution doesn't allow it, then we'll have to make arrangements so that we can proceed along usual democratic lines. The president will be one whom we will choose just in order to meet the requirements of the constitution.
Her National League for Democracy party is heading toward a landslide victory, a move that would forever change Myanmar's political landscape. As of Tuesday afternoon local time, the Election Commission says the NLD won 78 of the lower house seats so far. The party won over 85% of seats in the upper house and regional assemblies. The party won the last national election in 1990, but military rulers annulled the results and kept Suu Kyi under house arrest for nearly 2 decades. Suu Kyi quickly became an internationally recognized symbol of democracy, which helped her win the Nobel Peace Prize in 1991. Kim Jeon, Arirang News.
A commemorative Remembrance Day ceremony was held in the port city of Busan to honor fallen soldiers from the Korean War on Wednesday. The highlight was a burial ceremony for a British-Korean War veteran who died after the war, who was laid to rest at the UN cemetery. Connie Kim reports from Busan.
14 years ago, British-Korean War veteran Robert McCutter passed away, and it wasn't until this moment that his last wish was fulfilled, to be buried with his fellow soldiers in the soil he fought for. McCutter spent 2 years fighting in the Korean War and always wished to revisit South Korea while he was still alive. Unfortunately, due to ill health, that didn't happen. Even following his death, it has taken some time for him to return. War veterans who died after the end of the Korean War were not permitted to be buried at the UN Memorial Cemetery, but the policy changed this year, allowing McCutter to be buried here.
It's been a long time in coming to get to this situation, and I never thought it would happen. And I can't thank the people who have made it possible enough for the help and the way and the respect in which the people of South Korea.
For other Korean War veterans from UN member nations, the burial ceremony was an opportunity to see a fellow soldier laid to rest. This is where 2,300 soldiers from 11 UN member nations now lie at rest in peace.
It gives you a feeling, it gives you a closure. You know that they are put to rest and they have gone to our Savior up in heaven.
With South Korea holding its first burial ceremony for a British veteran of the Korean War at the UN Memorial Cemetery, the Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs expects more Korean War veterans from UN member nations to be laid to rest alongside their comrades here. November 11th is a day World War I ended and serves as a special day, Remembrance Day and Veterans Day for nations around the world, as well as here in the port city of Busan. Some 90 Korean War veterans from UN member nations were invited for the Turn Toward Busan ceremony. At 11 a.m. local time, locals and representatives from 21 UN member nations, including the US, Canada, and Australia, held a minute's silence honoring those soldiers who fell during the conflict. Gratitude and respect were expressed by the Korean War veterans, citizens, and civic groups as they undertook a 3.3-kilometer parade through the port city to remember their efforts and sacrifice in protecting the country. Connie Kim, Arirang News, Busan.
That's the end of our newscast. Thank you for watching.